Could this odd-looking camera have helped win the Battle of Britain? And is it still usable as a camera 80 years later? Let's find out. A while back, I bought this camera off Norwegian Craigslist. The ad had very little information, except that it was from the Second World War. It turns out, it was made to help defend Britain from the German Luftwaffe. And in this video, I'm going to take this piece of history outside and see if it still works. But first, let's go all the way back to the First World War and see why this camera even exists. In the First World War, we started using airplanes for combat. That presented a unique problem when doing target practice. For ground targets like fortifications, vehicles, or personnel, it's pretty straightforward to set up a dummy target in a field. Practicing anti-aircraft fire is obviously a bit more difficult. You want a target that moves and behaves realistically without shooting at your own planes. Shooting at a piece of paper is simple, but I doubt it's very effective training. Using a kite as a target seems like a better idea.
This kite differs from an ordinary kite in that it has a rudder and is flown with two lines. The operator signals to release the kite. A 10-knot wind is required. The kite quickly rises to its zenith and is let out to a range of about 250 yards. The gunners can examine it and see the visible effects of their marksmanship.
As crazy as it sounds, they did sometimes practice with live ammunition on a real airplane with a real pilot. I'll show you how that worked in a bit, but a safer solution is to practice with cameras instead of guns. Enter the Hythe camera gun. This camera was designed to look and operate just like the Lewis machine gun. But instead of firing bullets, it took a photograph of what you were aiming at when you pulled the trigger. This way, your instructor could examine the pictures after the training session and determine if your aim was correct. The Hythe camera was used both onboard airplanes in simulated dogfights, as well as in ground-based anti-aircraft training. The Hythe camera evolved through multiple iterations, and in the 1930s, other cameras based on similar concepts showed up. The Williamson G22 was a 1934 camera made to be mounted on top of an aircraft wing. The pilot could trigger the camera through a cable, taking a picture of what the airplane's guns were aimed at. By 1940, the Second World War was coming to Britain.
German plan for invasion of England. Phase 1. Knock out the Royal Air Force and its bases.
The Houghton Butcher Company, famous for the line of Ensign cameras, did, like a lot of British industry, quickly turn around to help with the war effort. One camera they started producing was this one, the Anti-Aircraft Verifying Camera, also known as the Anti-Aircraft Close Range Attack Camera. It's very similar in design to the Williamson G22 with just some minor differences. The biggest difference is the intended use. While the G22 was designed to be mounted to an airplane, this camera was designed to be mounted to an anti-aircraft gun. Anti-aircraft or ACAC positions were vital in the Battle of Britain. While actually hitting and downing an aircraft may have been rare, the guns forced the attacking planes to make maneuvers and fly at altitudes that made it a lot harder to hit their intended targets. Anti-aircraft operations were a highly scientific endeavor, using advanced analog computers often manned by women. These instruments were used to measure the height, speed and direction of an airplane, and from that, compute where the guns should be aimed and which fuse timings should be used. At closer range, however, the gunner would simply use the gun sights to aim. It was likely with these closer range weapons that the AA verifying camera could be useful. Allowing the aim to be inspected after a training session could tell the gunner whether he was leading the target too much or too little. While the Hythe gun camera replaced the gun, this camera is mounted alongside a real gun. This means it could also be used to photograph actual live combat in addition to training. The camera could be triggered when the gunner scored a hit, and the pictures could then be inspected later to assess the damage done to the aircraft. Earlier I hinted at a more dangerous solution to the problem of anti-aircraft training, and indeed, sometimes a brave pilot would tie a target to a rope at the back of his plane. Then, the anti-aircraft guns could be loaded with live ammunition, and hopefully the recruits hit their target instead of the airplane just ahead of it. Let's take a closer look at the camera itself. It has a unique feature that I'm not sure I've seen in any other camera, which allows you to embed metadata in your analog images. First though, you have to appreciate the military-grade wooden carrying case. With the camera inside, the case weighs 11 kilos. It has a rope for a handle and some solid marks of use. On the inside of the lid, there is a metal plate with engraved instructions for using the camera. Looking at the camera, the first thing that jumps out to me is the most metal shutter release cable I've ever seen. It's shaped and feels like a pistol, and like the rest of the camera, feels very heavy-duty and robust. It's actually not only a shutter release cable, but is also used to advance the film to the next frame. And it features a wheel with a frame counter. The grip connects to the camera itself through so-called Bowden cables that work much the same way as brake lines on a bicycle. They rotate gears in the camera when pulled, which actuates the shutter release or the film advance. The camera has 3 shutter modes, labeled F, B, and D. Strangely, B does not indicate bulb mode, but instead the normal mode with a fixed and short shutter speed. I don't know whether this is intentional and B is short for something other than bulb, or if the knob has gotten out of sync at some point. The F mode acts as an actual bulb mode, and D is what is usually labeled T, where the shutter remains open until you pull the release a second time. This is a metal lens cap, which is connected to the shutter mechanism and automatically opens as the shutter is pulled. That happens through this clever spring mechanism on the side. The instructions recommend closing this lens cap immediately after taking a picture. It's not entirely clear to me why, but it's possible they were concerned about the shutter not being completely light tight. The shutter itself has an unusual design that I've not seen elsewhere. It opens like a set of Venetian blinds with 4 separate leaves that all flip up to a horizontal position. This means the shutter still does block some small amount of light from hitting the film even when open, but I've not seen signs of this affecting the final image. Let me know in the comments if you've seen a shutter design like this in other cameras. To decide which ISO film to use, I needed to know the actual shutter speed of the camera. A while back, I made a very simple shutter speed tester based on a light sensor. You shine a light through the shutter and measure the time period the light level is higher than some threshold. Using this tester, the shutter speed seemed to be around 50 milliseconds or 1/20th of a second. This seems a bit long to me, both because it will be very easy to overexpose in daylight with a fixed f6.7 aperture, and because it could be too long to freeze the motion of an airplane. I'm guessing it was designed with a faster shutter speed and the mechanism has simply degraded over the last 80 years, and is just in need of some adjustment. Just in front of the film plane there is a glass plate with a center reticle and degree markings. The degree markings can indicate how many degrees away from the target you were aiming. On the back of the camera there is a compartment for a battery. Now you're probably wondering what the battery is for, as this camera has no light meter and a completely mechanical shutter. But this brings us to a strange and unique feature of this camera, because the battery powers a small light bulb in a compartment on the side of the camera. This bulb illuminates a small white plate, and between this compartment and the film compartment there is a small tube with a lens. When the shutter is released, the bulb illuminates and whatever is written on the white board is exposed onto the corner of the image. So with this feature, the camera can record metadata like the date, location, or which personnel is manning the gun. But enough talking, I wanted to get some pictures out of this thing. I wonder if anyone has ever used this camera to take a selfie. With a fixed focus, presumably at infinity, I needed as long of a distance as possible between me and the camera. I set up the camera and a mirror at the opposite ends of my apartment. Given the light level inside, I opted to use the bulb mode instead of the fixed 1/20th of a second. I developed the roll in some HC-110 and was really excited to see that the roll had images on it. As it turns out, twice the length of my apartment was still not far enough away, so I'm out of focus. I also pointed the camera out my window, but here I used the fixed shutter speed. The ones I took out the window turned out a little bit better than the ones inside, but they were quite overexposed, which I had to correct for when scanning. Of course, I also managed to insert the glass plate backwards, so the degree markings at the edge of the frame are mirrored. Thankfully, that's easy to fix for the next roll, and I mean, only an idiot would make the same mistake twice, right? There was also quite a bit of variation in the exposure of the metadata text, and overall the text was less exposed than the rest of the picture. This can actually be corrected for by pulling the shutter multiple times before advancing the film. This works because the shutter itself will only open once until it's recocked by the film advance mechanism. But the light bulb, on the other hand, will light up every time the trigger is pulled. To find some more interesting subjects, I took the camera on a Saturday drive to a beach outside Oslo. It was around freezing temperatures on this day, and that turned out to be a problem. After developing these images, I realized all but the first image was severely overexposed. I'm pretty sure it must be due to the shutter sticking open in the cold weather. A proper CLA would probably fix this problem. I still got a few usable frames though. Now, before I show these, I should say that when setting up the camera, I took great care to think through the correct orientation of the glass plate. I flipped it horizontally to fix the mirrored numbers, and then flipped it vertically to match the inverted image on the film. As some of you may have realized, these two actions cancel each other out in the horizontal direction. So of course, I again ended up with mirrored numbers on the final images. I shot a third roll on the roof of my apartment building, working quickly to finish the roll before the camera could cool down too much. I finally figured out how to get the glass plate in the correct orientation, so here we can see what the angle markings are actually supposed to look like. These were also reasonably close to the correct exposure with overcast weather and ISO 50 film. From this image, it looks like the focus is not fixed at infinity, but slightly closer. This white building at around 200 meters is sharper than the tall buildings further away. Whether this is intentional or not, I don't know. It could be intentional depending on the range of the guns this camera was designed for. I was really happy to see some actual images out of this ancient thing. But I had this nagging thought that the camera was made to photograph airplanes. So to properly honor it, I should try to take it back to that original purpose. So when the weather had warmed up, I brought it out to a popular plane spotting location by Oslo Airport. I was a bit worried that it would be hard to track the planes given how heavy the camera is. But it turns out it was quite easy to predict where the arriving planes would be, so I just had to line it up beforehand and pull the trigger at the right time. So finally, here is a picture of an actual airplane taken with the AA verifying camera. And hopefully, no one reported me to the authorities for aiming at airliners with a piece of unknown military equipment. Thanks for watching.